Hi guys, it's Sam from the Disciples. I'm just here to do a video explaining the new Chimera deck that came out as part of Dune. Um, how to play it, basic combos, various different approaches, uh, all that kind of general overview kind of stuff. So we'll start off with some basic combos. There are two pretty basic lines that the deck generally functions with. The first one is either Cornfield Coatl or Mirror Sword Knight, which this adds. So Coatl is a discard from hand. You can add one monster mentions Chimera Fusion from deck. So a lot of the time you're just going to add Mirror Sword Knight, which is a quick effect tribute to special summon a monster that mentions Chimera Fusion from deck. So you just add normal, and then effect a special from deck. We special Big Wing Burfmit, which then adds a level 4 beast and or a Chimera Fusion. So off of just that, you're now at 3 cards. Very good. The monster you're going to add as part of this combo is the Gazelle, the new one from Dune. If this card's normal specials, you can add a Fiend or a Chimera Fusion. So that doesn't really do that much here. And then Chimera Fusion is literally just a quick play poly that can only be used in the main phase, and it has to use a Beast or Fiend monster as material for the summon. So we use both of them, and we go into the Chimera the King of Phantom Beasts. This is on field, it just hand loops, and it becomes Chimera the King of Phantom Beasts. Or Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast, the OG Yugi one. The Gazelle and the Burfmit have effects when they use as fusion material. Burfmit special summons an illusion monster from grave, and Gazelle adds one from deck. So we're then getting further advantage, just adds any illusion. And then Chimera Fusion, while you control a Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast, you can just add it from graveyard once per turn. You can also banish it to special summon a Gazelle and a Burfmit from deck or graveyard. So it can help if you're running a little low on resources as well, but generally adding one from grave is pretty solid because you don't want to lose one of these permanently. But yeah, it comes up now and then. So with that, we have this, which we contribute in the opponent's turn to summon another Burfmit draw phase. We've got the Chimera Fusion, which we can set and then have a Guardian Chimera threat during the opponent's main phase. And these, the Coatl and the Mirror Sword Knight being additional interrupts if we're not forced into Chimera Fusion early. Mirror Sword Knight negating a monster effect the opponent controls, while you control this on field, and Coatl negating targeting and destroying while you control this on field as well. So everything works together pretty nicely. But yeah, that's just a generic one-card combo, and you can see, we'll do this in the opponent's draw phase, do that, and then when we use this material, we can just summon any illusion again. So it does a lot very quickly. So yeah, that's the one-card combo with Coatl and Sword Knight, and then we'll do the same with just Branded Fusion. Branded Fusion's a weird one in that if you don't have access to Engine, you kind of have to use the Gazelle early as material because that just adds any Illusionist, any illusion monster. So that's going to be Sword Knight a lot of the time because, even if you do get drolled at that point, you can just summon it and then still get advantage in your opponent's draw phase. But this is just the one card combo, so we're always going to go Rinbrum. We'll just add the Sword Knight, summon the Burfmit, add Gazelle, and then it's basically just the same combo as before. The only difference is we're not getting the additional add-off Gazelle to have any illusion material in illusion monster in hand to use as potential Guardian Chimera material. But you can see we still set up the Sword Knight in the opponent's draw phase as well, so we do get another search off an illusion with Gazelle. But the downside is that it does go through all three in 2 turns. So yeah, that's the generic overview as to how to play the turn 1 with this deck. The advantages of the deck and what I quite like about it is that it does, obviously all of that is off just one card. So imagine all of these combos, you've got 4 other potential cards as well. So they could just be hand traps, they could be talents, they could be Fenrir, they could be anything. And if you do have access to illusion, this Rinbrum, rather than being a very good card in itself, is a Mirror Jade, which is a huge threat as a card. So it just does a lot of very little. You get to play a lot of very powerful non-engine, and yeah. The weaknesses of it though is that you probably saw that obviously branded fusion is one of the single biggest ash baits in the game, but there are a lot of points in this deck where just a single hand trap can kind of stop you in his tracks. So an Effect Veiler on the Birthmit summon, on the first Birthmit summon, or an Ash on Mirror Sword Knight, an Ash on Branded Fusion if you've got no further extender, can be very, very punishing. So that is an inherent weakness of the deck, unfortunately. But that's generally, one of those things. Another weakness is that a lot of the ways you play are inherently gated by your single normal summon, which can be very, very awkward to play around. So if you don't have a Branded Fusion or any other way to put a monster on board, for example, if they Ash your Mirror Sword Knight, you have no ways to get another monster to board a lot of the time, unless you've hard opened, Gazelle and Birthmit and Chimera Fusion, and you can play through it. But that's really a rarity. A lot of the time you're just going to be ending on no monsters and hoping your hand traps can get you to your turn 2. But that isn't really a consistent thing. But as long as if you had a monster, for example, and a back row, having that threat of Guardian Chimera can be really, can make your opponent play in a way that's not necessarily optimally. But if you don't have that threat, it's kind of frustrating. So this is the list that I've been taking to locals and other online tournaments and finding quite enjoyable. It's pretty just standard Chimera deck plus Fenrir, Branded Fusion, and a bunch of other powerful non-engine hand trap. The reason I've been liking a heavy hand trap version is because you want to be dragging the opponent down into a very simple game state where your very powerful one-card starters can do a lot very quickly. We are also in a hand trap format, so even if your opponent does activate cards that do prevent you doing your thing, you don't want your opponent to just then suddenly start running wild, because the chances are they will, given we're in a heavy hand trap format, they're going to be playing cards that will heavily affect your turn, so you do want to have a nice plan B. You also want to be playing more hand traps because you want your Chimera draws to be valuable. So obviously the pops are very good, but the higher your chances are of drawing an actual hand trap off of it to provide an additional interrupt is very, very, appealing. The main downside to it is the fact that everyone is playing talents. So even if you do play, a very powerful Nibiru, if your opponent talents looks at your hand and you've only got one starter and they leave you with, an Albaz and a Fenrir while you've got a Nib on board, that's pretty weak. So it can be quite frustrating if the opponent does talents you, but I think, I still would play this deck this way. The next version I've seen some people play online is a heavier Kashtira version. So you're basically sacrificing the branded package to play more, Unicorns, the Theosis, Birth, and Rise Heart. So while this does give you more versatility in your plays in a format where people are likely to be hand trapping you, it's a deck that plays harder into Nib. It can gate your plays somewhat because there are some Kashtira cards that lock you into XEZs, and Birthmit will lock you into fusions. And in regular versions that wouldn't necessarily matter, but here it's can be quite punishing. So it's one of those things that I've not personally tested, but I'm also not, in theory, just not a fan of it. The fact you're taking out all of your branded things, it takes an additional starter away from you, and you're entirely relying upon seeing either the Mirror Sword Knight or the Quattle. So it's a very unappealing list, or way to approach the deck, in my opinion. The main way that I've seen people play it, though, is a branded version. So I've seen this more than I have the other versions. Obviously, branded cards are very good. The fact that the branded opening allows you to give you additional access to Branded Fusion without costing the normal summon is a very, very good thing. But when we're in a heavy hand trap format and you're playing a deck that's basically just kind of extenders but isn't really consistently going to do what you want it to do, and then has no backup when what you want to do doesn't actually happen, is not appealing to me at all. Not really a fan. And the only way to actually really fit, this in is to play an actual proper monstrosity, like 60 cards, which I think I saw someone do, but would not recommend. The hit to consistency playing 60 cards, I think chances of you seeing one of Branded Fusion, Mirror Sword Knight, or Coatl goes down to probably 60% from 75. So yeah, I wouldn't personally recommend it. So now that we've talked about various different approaches to the deck, let's talk about various cards that could be played in the various hand trap, non-engine, consistently card to play spots. So I don't think Talents needs much explanation. We're in a heavy hand trap format. Talents is obviously broken, both going first and second. If you do get hand trapped, your opponent's going to be on 4 cards. You can Talents look at the hand, put them on 3, and have perfect knowledge what to play around. And given if you've been hand trapped in a very tender point, you'll want to have perfect knowledge, nearly perfect knowledge of the opponent's hand, so as to better use your non-engine and hand traps to play around your opponent's turn and just get to your turn 2, and there you can re-establish the control over the game. Purely because it is a heavy hand trap format, and you absolutely want a lot of your critical cards to go through, you just play Call By. I think it's kind of needed. I'm playing Book of Moon for 2 reasons. One, it's just a very, very good card at the moment, and given the hand traps of choice at the moment seem to be Ash, Imperm, Veiler, I've seen main Ghost Mourner as well. Book of Moon helps your Birthmate resolve against 2 of them, 3 of them even. So it's one of those cards that I think has enough versatility and deserves its spot. I've seen some people playing this card both in this deck and in others, and I don't think it's good enough in this current meta. I don't think that if you look at the kind of boards that Chimera are putting out, they're, either they're just going a Rise Pass and backing it up with hand traps and lances, or they're going full nut and playing into Nib. But none of those boards lose to Super Poly. Pearly don't lose to Super Poly. Dragons do lose to Super Poly, but no, that's not really a heavily represented deck. Maybe Labyrinth, but there's just not... I don't think there's enough coverage for Super Poly to be playable at the moment. You do have the extra deck space for it, but I just don't think that it's applicable enough into the current meta for it to deserve its, side deck spot. I've seen some people play around with this. It obviously synergizes with the fact that it's a beast and you control more beasts, so you can bounce more than 1 card. It's very good. It is basically budget Pancratops. It can only be playable going second, and you'd rather play cards that are versatile enough where you can play this, or you can play like another book. You could play Book of Moon, or you can play Nibiru, or some other hand trap that's like actually playable going first and second. Whereas I don't think this is deserving of its spot, just because I don't think it covers enough of what you want your side deck to. So I'm playing Crossout for a very similar reason to Call By. I feel like you have to play it in the side, because if you go first and you see Crossout, you'll rather be that card be any card that can help break the board in the first place, rather than, I want my Branded Fusion to resolve into a full, Cash or Pearly board. It's pretty clunky, so I wouldn't main it, but in the side I think it's got a lot of applicability. So your opponent's more likely to know what to hand trap, they're more likely to side in more hand traps if they, aren't maining them already. And if you're going second, it's one of the only outs to Dim Barrier, which is, I think, a card that's on the up in terms of playability. Book of Eclipse, I just don't think, since the list to Cash that where Arise Heart went to 1 and Diablosis went, and where 5 zone locks were slightly more common, I don't think Eclipse has got its spot where it's actually viable anymore. I know some people are playing it because Pearly is a deck and all this blah blah blah, but I don't think that Eclipse is actually playable. But if you want to play more Book of Moons, completely viable, to be honest. I've put this in here even though I was playing it but didn't like it. The reason this is playable is because when you summon a Birthmate in the opponent's turn, you're going to be adding a Chimera Fusion at any level 4 beast, of which this is a level 4 beast. So you can use it as material off the Chimera Fusion for a Guardian Chimera, and then you can use the Chimera Fusion in the opponent's turn to banish and then summon any Beast, Fiend, or Illusion, of which this is a Beast. So it's very good against Pearly, but I don't think it's got that coverage to actually deserve its spot. Plus, Pearly can somewhat play around it because this does start a chain, so they can just chain Happiness. So it's a little odd. It's cool, but I don't think good enough. So now we just move on to the consistency cards. So I'm playing Prosp, but I don't like it. A lot of the time, so rarely do you actually need a card to actually improve the consistency. What I tend to use it for is to add a talents or a powerful hand trap in the opponent's turn. I very rarely need to use Prosp to actually dig for engine. So it's one of those cards that I might not actually play, but I think it does up the consistency enough to where I'm at a level that I'm comfortable with. But I dislike it because it turns off talents draws, which can be helpful because you do want to have more cards to your opponent a lot of the time because your cards trade very well into the opponent. But it also turns off, when you're going second, the entire threat of Guardian Chimera, which is absolutely huge at breaking boards. So it's just one of those cards that you kind of at the moment should play, but I don't like it. Small World, because I don't think you need adds to the actual engine consistency of the deck. It's just, I've seen some people play it, I'm not a fan. And Desires, it's kind of dependent on the approach you actually want to take to the deck. If you're playing, Branded Fusion and a bunch of other things where if you banish the Albaz, you're just half your engine's turned off. That's pretty bad. It's nice that it baits Ash, but it's just I don't think you can play it. You can just roll the dice and hope that it won't banish half the important cards, but personally, losing access to 1 or 2 Chimera fusions off it, losing a Birthmit, losing the Albaz, it can add up and it can be very, very painful. So you can roll the dice with a deck and just add Desires and get away with it. I don't think this is one that you can, but I've seen some people do it. Just try it out, I guess, if you don't believe me. And then we get to the bit where we've got the most options and most variety, and that's actually just hand traps. So I've kind of ordered these first 4 in, actual viability. I think if I were to put 12 hand traps into any main deck at the moment, it would be these 4. I can't think of any ones that actually are viable enough to go ahead of it. A lot of people would play Droll. I've seen a lot of people maining Droll at the moment, but I don't think it's very good in the main in general. It's only playable against certain decks. It doesn't turn off Cash. The Cash can still put up a relatively threatening board through it. Pearly do a lot of the actual starting plays through in their draw phase. So you're not actually doing an effective draw a lot of the time game 1. You'd want to save it for decks like Vanadium and Dark World if you're some cringer at playing that at locals. But I don't think Droll's a main deck card, and I don't think it is a card that you can play in this either because it turns off the Guardian Chimera threat, which is the best interrupt you've got in the entire deck. So it's one of those weird cards that is very good, but I don't think it's playable in this. I think Ogre's very good at the moment, but it's in my side, but I don't think it's versatile enough in terms of what the current meta's shaping up to be that you can just have it in the main. So the next option is Bestials. They offer a lot in terms of they're both an interrupt and they're versatile enough in that they can be used as both Guardian Chimera food in both field and the hand. The fact that Magnamut could just add the Druisworm endlessly and allow you to put more big things on board is very good, obviously. The fact that Guardian Chimera can turn into a pop 3 effectively, very, very good. But I don't think the meta is in a position where the bestial coverage in general is worth its spot in the side. But I think if it shifts post-list, I think these would be one of the first cards I considered put back in. And then Bell is just one of those cards that pops up now and then. I don't think it's good at the moment, but maybe at some point. So now that we've gone through, how the deck works, various options, various builds, we'll talk about just how to approach just building the deck in general. So I think that in terms of the main deck, all of these, the Branded Fusion, the Illusion Monsters, the Chimera, are all mandatory 3-ofs. I don't see any way that you play anything less than that. The Birthmit, because it's level 5, You can play at 3, but I've only ever felt that I really needed 2. I very, very rarely needed a third. And a lot of the time when I need a third, it's because I didn't manage my resources efficiently and I ended up getting punished for it. The other engines that we play, I mean, we play Fenrir just because it's absolutely broken. And the fact that it offers versatility in terms of guarding Chimera food on field and grave, field and hand, very, very good. It's a threat as soon as it's put on board, and it doesn't require the normal summon, which is something that this deck, it literally like fixes a main core problem of the deck in that sense. The reason I'm playing a Nightmare Magician is because as part of the standard lines, so Quattle, Sword Knight, I found that I was getting 2 searches off Gazelle by using as material. So I was ending the turn with an illusion monster in hand, which is going to be follow-up for my turn 2. And then I was also sometimes using it as fusion material on my opponent's turn, getting another illusion monster. And the only options for that is either Cornfield Quattle or Mirror Sword Knight, and this job is pretty much exclusively to add this. So I was resolving the same card twice, and I was basically adding the same card. And it was annoying me because it doesn't do enough for what I wanted it to do. So I toyed around with adding this in, purely because you can summon it back easily off the Baphomet, and it's actually quite a good card. So the fact that it acts as a permanent snatch steal and pops a card that doesn't target, it does a lot while it's on board, and you can both get it out easily and you can recur it to field quite easily. So I started toying around with it. I've quite liked it. It's also a very good dark to use when you want to go in the Rebellion line, because at the moment you'd really never want to use the actual Baphomet as material, because you want to summon them from deck as much as possible and not actually put them to grave before you can start using as material to get the Chimera fusion out in the first place. So that's why there are just enough reasons where everything sort of came together where it was just the best card to add. And yeah, I'd recommend trying it because I've not seen many other people play it so far. The branded fusion is pretty self-explanatory. You just play it because it's the best engine, doesn't require normal summon, acts as a starter, and does a lot very quickly, very easily. And then these are just the standard non-engine choices, and the annoying prosps which you kind of have to play at the moment. I think everything up to the Rinbrim in the extra deck is pretty solid for this. Most people play 2 Chimera. I was trying 3 because I couldn't really think of anything else to put in. A friend called Bjorn suggested Instant Fusion and Millenniumize Restrict, which I'm going to play around with, but I haven't tested, so didn't elaborate much on in the video. These are just talents targets. You could obviously hard summon the Fenrir, but I'm not too convinced that's a good idea. Lingaribo's there because Sprite still cringe summoning Ibly, and Donna for similar reason. Just clearing stuff. So in closing, I'm quite a fan of the deck. I've been enjoying playing it, and it's felt very, very good. When I've lost with the deck, it's pretty much been entirely down to I've not seen a line to play through an opponent's board and gotten punished for it. So it's never really felt like the deck's been bad. It's that the deck's had an out for me and I've just not seen it. And when you guys, if you are going to pick up the deck, you'll probably find something similar, where a lot of your success will be down to actually interacting with the opponent's decks and figuring out and knowing what plays the opponent's making, where if you were to interact with, are huge pain points. So for us, it's quite obvious, Ash on Branded Fusion, or Mirror Sword Knight, Veiler, or an Imperm on Baphomet. But for the opponent, you've got so many different decks you've got to try and bear in mind, and sometimes if you're playing against random stuff like, New Altergeist or, whatever, you've got to know what it is that's going to really, really punish them to really, really feel successful and that the deck's actually treating you well. So that's something I'd bear in mind before I was to commit buying it. But even if you were, I was able to fill up a card market basket with every single branded card and every single illusion card plus 3 Guardian Chimera for €70 plus postage. So it's not exactly a very, very expensive deck to pick up. So if you do play around with it on DB and figure you want to try it out in real life, it's not exactly a huge capital outlay if you were to decide that. I wouldn't say that it's particularly well positioned into a heavy hand trap meta, just because a lot of your stuff is so brittle. But if we do move away from it, like into a newer, if there was a ban list or someone comes up with a crazy deck, who knows? It might be quite well positioned. So that's something to bear in mind. I think the deck will also struggle if Dimensional Barrier starts coming back. I know Labyrinth are obviously playing it, but I haven't seen many other people on it yet. I'm still scared enough of it to play it as a cross-out target, but we'll have to see how the meta develops, right? But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If any of you guys would like a similar video on another deck or something like that, or you've got any further questions on this one that I didn't cover in the video, just put it down in the comments. This is pretty much it. Cool. Thanks for watching. Thanks as always to Mike from the Brotherhood and Games Apparel and Metamats. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Bye.